Once again, hello and welcome everyone who is just joining or just joining in for the 8th SASI Lunchbreak on supply chain due diligence. My name is Annette Cerulli-Harms from the Policy Institute for Consumer Policy, and it's a great pleasure to be here and guide you through today's session. So today's topic is on implementing due diligence through biodiversity-based value chains. And we have a program that is densely packed with content, so I won't say much before we dive into the program. But I do want to explore today's topic a little bit with you because we're going to touch upon aspects that we haven't necessarily treated in this kind of detail before. So I would like to ask you now, with a word cloud, your opinion on what you think about when you hear the word biodiversity. So the poll should be coming up as a pop-up, or it should be appearing in your chat. So please answer the question, what do you think about when you hear the word biodiversity? What is the first thing that comes to mind? So let's see, people are so yes, the word cloud is populating. Okay, great. We see nature and complexity, animals, the basis of life, agroforestry, things around tropical. Basis of life seems to resonate with other people in the group, and it's now sort of becoming the central piece of this word cloud. Great. Climate resilience is a newcomer now. The basis of life is still sporting in the middle. I'm loving this. We also now see resilience coming up as more and more people seem to be thinking about that word as they think about biodiversity. Life support, varied species. So yes, I think these are all really, really important concepts that are all related to biodiversity. So I'd be also curious to hear how our speakers are going to pick up on that concept later on in their presentations. And then we have one more question for you, and that's going to be a simple yes and no answer, just to sort of understand the level of engagement in the room. Have you ever heard of BioTrade? So there should be now another voting question. I think you can continue submitting things to the word cloud, but please answer yes or no if you've ever heard of BioTrade. And currently, it seems like I was going to say it looked like a 50-50 split, but now there's definitely a majority in the room that hasn't yet heard of the concept of BioTrade. So stay tuned, people. You're going to learn what this is all about. So it's great that you are all here. So what do we have on the agenda? We are going to have opening remarks by the BMZ, the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, today represented by Lisa Kirfel-Rühle, who's going to come up in a second. Afterwards, we have 3 speakers, one from BioInnovation Africa, a GIZ project, and then 2 speakers from the Union for Ethical BioTrade, so the UEBT. So the Union for Ethical BioTrade are going to tell you all about BioTrade and what it means and why it's so important on their standards on the Biodiversity Action Plan in practice. Today is a bit different compared to other lunch breaks. We're going to hear all of the presentations one after the other and then have a big joint discussion with questions and answers together with you in the audience at the very end. So now, first of all, let me hand over to the BMZ, to Lisa Kirfel-Rühle.
Hello, everyone. On behalf of the German Ministry for Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, it's again and again a great pleasure to welcome all of you to today's 8th SASI lunch break. For those of you who are not familiar with that, we do meet every first Friday of the month, and it's a well-established and trusted format. Meanwhile, it presents various practice-oriented tools and guidelines, demonstrating that the implementation of corporate due diligence is feasible for many. Contrary to common claims, a recent study of 11,000 French companies shows that corporate due diligence can be successfully implemented without harming profits or revenues. In contrary, it contributes to higher resilience in value chains. In the same spirit of showing what is achievable, we would like to highlight in today's session the crucial role of biodiversity in responsible business conduct and sustainable value creation. Because biodiversity is not just about conservation, it is a fundamental basis for production and value creation in economies in both developing and development countries. And according to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, BioTrade, meaning trade and products of biological origin, is valued of $3.7 trillion. It accounts of 70% of global exports, with low-income countries often relying on biodiversity-based products for over 30% of their exports. The interconnection between nature, people, and economy becomes even more tangible in biodiversity-based value chains. Biodiversity-based products are those directly derived from biological diversity and where specific properties or active ingredients are targeted for economic valorization. This includes, for example, the use of wild collected plants like shea nuts or argan seeds, community cultivation schemes, the marketing of non-timber forest products like the canauba or beeswax, or the integration of traditional knowledge held by indigenous people and local communities. Companies active in industry sectors such as cosmetics, flavor and fragrance, biotechnology, pharmacy, and also in the agriculture sector have a strong interest and a responsibility to protect the biological and cultural foundations their products and business models depend on. They therefore play a key role in implementing sustainability commitments and due diligence policies. Today, we will hear more about biodiversity-based value chains, their particularities and potentials in development cooperation, partnering with the private sector. First, there will be an overview be provided of the BMZ-financed GIZ project BioInnovation Africa. And in the second part, we will also gain insights from the Union for Ethical BioTrade, which is a global association that supports companies working with biodiversity-based value chains in meeting their due diligence responsibilities at multiple levels. So for us as BMZ, it is essential to foster collaboration across departments and thematic priorities. Today's exchange highlights the importance of aligning efforts between agriculture, rural development, and biodiversity conservation. I hope you will enjoy the insights and exchange, and I wish us all a constructive and enjoyable time, and thank you for taking part this time. So I hand back over to Annette. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you for being here and for setting the scene. And thank you also for bringing today this evidence from the French companies, because I think it is more important than ever to point out how many companies do see sustainable supply chains and sort of protecting biodiversity and due diligence requirements as an enhancer to their business case. Such evidence as the types of initiatives that we're going to hear about today, I think are all the more important as we see the political environment that is changing. Just this week, the German government voted to weaken the up to now valid Supply Chain Act, so the Lieferkettengesetz, to weaken it in the sense that reports are no longer required or in a less stringent way. And so this type of evidence is important, that we see that even though the laws might be changing, respecting supply chains and seeing the benefits of sustainable supply chains are all the more important. So the SASI obviously continues to support sustainable supply chains. And if you're interested in it, the European Commission has recently, over the summer, launched a call for evidence on voices around what the the public and different types of stakeholder communities would like to say about how the future sustainability regulation should be simplified. Should it be simplified? Should it not be simplified? So if you're interested with the organization or as an individual to contribute to this call for evidence around sustainability regulation, you may do so via the link in the chat function, and the call for evidence is still open for 5 more days until September 10th. But now I would like to go back to our program and invite our first speaker up onto the stage. And I would like to introduce to you Anja Teschner. Anja is an advisor in the BioInnovation Africa project of the GIZ, and she's been working for over a decade with international development organizations. As part of the BioInnovation Africa project, she collaborates with African and other international companies, particularly in the flavor, fragrance, cosmetics, and pharmaceutical sectors, to implement projects that promote socioeconomic change in African supplier countries. So we look very much forward to your presentation, which explains further what biodiversity-based products are and why they are so important. Welcome, Anja, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Annette, for the introduction, and welcome to everybody in the call from my side. Also, thank you for the opportunity to talk about biodiversity-based value chains. As Annette mentioned, maybe a topic which has not been treated by this exchange format yet. So I'm very happy to share here a few information, and also to mention that the content that I will present here is also drawn very much from our project BioInnovation Africa that Annette already mentioned, a global project that is already running since more than 6 years. So we had a bit of time to gather a few experience on that. As this platform normally consists of actors or rather in the agriculture supply chain, and as we also have seen that maybe trade and biodiversity-based products are not so well known among all of you, I thought to start with a short background information on this. So if we talk about biodiversity-based products, we talk about goods and services that derive from genetic resources from species that depend very, very strongly on the biodiversity for their existence. So they're really interlinked in the biodiversity around them. And I put in here a picture. It's a wetland landscape in Madagascar. And what you cannot see from this tiny picture is the area where a plant called Centella asiatica is collected. It's a very, very tiny plant that is grown there and hand-picked. And that plant can actually grow a bit everywhere. There are a lot of countries where this plant grows. You could also probably in summer grow it in Germany. But there is an active ingredient which is very important for the cosmetic industry, and that active ingredient is the strongest if it is wild, if it is, so to say, cultivated wildly, or if it's grown wildly in this kind of landscape. So just to emphasize the interdependency on the biodiversity and on the landscape around it. And if we now come to the term biotrade, so first of all, if you just say biotrade, of course, it's the trade of biological resources. So any kind of biological resource that they might be. However, if we write biotrade in the slightly different way, as it is here on the slide, it actually refers to the commercialization of biodiversity-based products, but under a specific or under specific sustainability criteria. And that's actually a term that has been framed by by UNCTAD, now UN Trade and Development, and we will come back to this term more frequently. But once again, it's especially the sustainability criteria which is important here. And if we talk about biodiversity-based products, here's just a picture of what this can entail. So in the introduction, it was already said, we talk about products from cosmetics, from flavor, fragrance, food and nutrition, pharmaceutical products, but also other industries. So this small rubber piece here, for example, would also be considered as a biodiversity-based product. And to explain a bit more in detail what biodiversity-based products are or biodiversity-based supply chains, we wanted to compare it to agricultural supply chains and look a bit into the similarities of those types of supply chains and into particularities of biodiversity-based agriculture supply chains. So similarities, both sectors, so to say, follow a value chain logic. So there are different stages from the raw material to the final product that you have to go through to come up with a final product. So we have the cultivation, the processing, distribution, traceability, coming to the end consumer. We have a wide range of stakeholders engaged in the different steps, and stakeholders that need to be coordinated and to some extent also capacitated. So we're coming back to this chain logic. So of course there are the producers at the beginning, but there are also people who are more engaged in processing. There's also going to research and development and going to the consumer level. Something that both also supply chain types have in common is that they're working with certification to add value to their products. So, and to reach different markets, higher end markets. So also in biodiversity-based value chains, we have organic certification, we have fair trade certification, and we use geographical indications, meaning to indicate where the resource in this product is coming from to make it a bit more tangible for the consumer. And then, and this is obviously something that also brings us together here in this call, there are increasing concerns on sustainability. So there's on one hand the demand from the consumer who is looking into fairly traded products, but there's obviously also national and international regulations. We're talking about due diligence here. So there is more and more concerns and needs for reporting on social responsibility, on labor rights, but also on environmental aspects, impact on the biodiversity, on climate, etc. So just to name a few here. And now I would like to go into the differences, and I will structure it along the value chain. So I will start with the plant itself, then going to the companies who are involved, and then going to the end product. And those are just a few differences that we came up with in our team. There might be more to it. So if we look at the environmental aspects, so really at the plant, where is it grown, by whom is it grown? We see that it is a very diverse range of origins that those plants can have. So they are very often wild growing, but they can also be semi-domesticated. They can also be cultivated. We have also been heard now about non-timber forest products, meaning forest products coming out of a forest landscape. And linking to this is also the high diversity of species that you can find in the area where this resource is, or this plant is collected or is growing. So very often it's an ecosystem with very different species. So we don't talk monoculture at all. And we also often have the fact that, or the aspect that multiple species are cultivated in one areas and one ecosystem. So they're obviously not just trying to valorize one resource, but several. And this diversity also has a positive aspect then in regards to climate resilience. Once again, here trying to avoid monocultures. Then something what is very unique also, it's rather a local production system, meaning in comparison to agricultural supply chains, it's often low input and low mechanization value chains. It's done by communities, by local communities with traditional management systems. So it's really smaller value chain and hands-on value chains with traditional uses. And then also something which is quite particular for this is the traditional knowledge, meaning if we talk about plants that are growing in the environment, obviously there are indigenous people, local communities that are using those plants since years already for certain treatments, for eating, for drinking, for fluid, etc. And those kind of knowledges, or that kind of knowledge, is very often used for innovation in final consumer products. So companies are very interested in that kind of traditional use of resources, because it can create new products, basically. And something that I just want to mention very quickly here in the context is access and benefit sharing, which is quite important. And to not go into detail, but it's basically an international mechanism that allows countries to be compensated if companies from other countries are using the genetic information or the traditional knowledge on their product, on their resources. So basically, if somebody just goes out and take a resource and just research on it, but it's basically coming from another country. So that's also a very particular aspect here on this value chains. If we now going more into the processing aspects, what we have here is very often we have rather small companies who are engaged and who are specialized on a particular step in the value chain. So we rarely have this vertical integration of one company doing all, but we have smaller companies specializing on different steps within the value chain. And then those companies very often try to scale up through diversification, meaning they are probably, or let's say they are known for doing extraction of essential oils, and they would then not just do it for one plant, but they would do it for several plants. So this is basically their strategy to diversify it. And that actually also, that already saying this local aspects of companies or local companies, a very local production system is also an aspect that can that promoting biodiversity-based value chains have quite a wide-reaching impact on the local economy, on the local community, because it's the companies involved and the first people in the production involved are very often from that area. What we, however, are facing, and the project BioInnovation Africa did quite some work on this, is limited access to financing. And that is because biodiversity-based businesses often do not fit the standard financing instruments, which can work for agriculture value chains and agribusinesses, but biodiversity-based companies are often very much too small, so it's not so interesting for financing institutions, and often it's also not too understood what the work is actually that those companies are doing. And if we now go to the consumer side of it, we look at a small market, but at a growing market. So it's normally a high-end market. So I already said cosmetics, pharmaceutical, but also nutritional products. So it has a high value on the market, but often it's rather a niche market. So it's a smaller market. It's not very developed, but however, there's a steady growth in it. What we then one aspect, a very important aspect that we have is the aspect of research and development and innovation. So that really is very important for this sector because there is a high pressure to innovate and to remain competitive. So if we talk about cosmetic products, we all know they're just on our shelves for a few years and then they're out because new products have to come to the market. So there's a high pressure from the market that you innovate, that you remain competitive through new products. And especially if you want to innovate through completely new products and maybe find a resource and say, okay, this plant will give me this and this and that, there are very high investment costs involved to go through those process of product development. And it's obviously a very high risk also because it's an upfront payment, but there is a lot of uncertainty involved in it. I have already been told that we are very short on time. I will not go in too much into this detail to give us a bit more time. But just to say, I mean, I already highlighted there is quite some aspects on the biodiversity-based value chains touch really all aspects of the sustainability spectrum. So we have the strong dependency on the environment, on the plants, to be economically viable, to continue the business. And we have the social aspect, as I already mentioned also before, because the value chains are really very local. So you have really also a huge impact on the local business. And yeah, unfortunately, I will not go into details here because I will just skip to the next one. So now we already talked about the potential biodiversity-based value chains and how they're linked to sustainability. I just want to mention a few framework to link it to the due diligence aspect and see how those value chains are guided. What are the frameworks and potential guidelines of those biodiversity-based value chains? And I would just quickly mention the UNCTAD BioTrade principles and criteria. This is basically where the term BioTrade was born. There are principles and criteria which are specifically developed for biodiversity-based supply chains. So those should guide those supply chains, and their criteria are looking into all three aspects of sustainability. And another tool is or other tools that are available have been developed by UEBT, who will speak in a bit. They did take these principles and criteria from UNCTAD, and they developed a concrete standard and concrete indicators through the UEBT standard to give companies concrete indicators and actions to how can I really be sustainable in biodiversity-based value chains. And they have a lot of different tools and guidance for companies to assess and address their risks. And we have the pleasure to listen to a few of them just afterwards. So I'll close it now and thank you.
Thank you very much, Anja, for this insightful presentation. And I do believe the slides are going to be uploaded. So in case you didn't catch any of the, some of the details, you can look it up afterwards. But yes, I think Anja did a perfect introduction for the next part of the presentation. So I will quickly introduce our next two speakers to you. First up is going to be Simona D'Amico. Simona is Head of Biodiversity and Impact at the Union for Ethical BioTrade, or also called UEBT. And obviously she didn't get this position anyhow, but because she's an expert on social biodiversity impacts of sourcing, especially botanicals. She's been for UEBT for 10 years and oversees work on biodiversity, conservation, and regeneration. So Simona, great that you're here. Thanks for joining. And Simona will then be joined by Gerhard Pretorius, who is the CEO of Natura Libra Environmental Consultants, and he's also a consultant for UEBT. He's an experienced environmentalist with a demonstrated history of working in the environmental services industry. As CEO, he knows how to do business development, sort of important skill, and he brings far-reaching expertise in nature conservation, certification, environmental and legislation and policy, as well as environmental auditing, just to mention a few. And so again, Simona and Gerhard, thanks for being here. The floor is yours, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today and for your interest in our presentation. Indeed, I will talk a bit about the work of UEBT and especially the work on the Biodiversity Action Plan and how it has been applied in the case of South Africa. I will do a short introduction and then I will let indeed Gerhard explain more on the concrete field work and concrete practices, because this is indeed where his expertise have been crucial to develop the work. First of all, a bit about UEBT and our vision, which is a world in which all people and biodiversity thrive. And for this, to reach this vision, we work basically with the companies in the cosmetic, pharmaceutical, herbs and spice sector and beverage sector to regenerate nature and secure better future for people. So basically, it is a combination of social and the biodiversity aspect, as Anja also explained before. And our focus is indeed a bit on what Anja also showed you, those what we call botanicals, I like to call them little ingredients. So basically, if you like, is anything that is not a commodity, is often the focus of our work. We go from root to seeds to flowers to leaves. So basically all those ingredients from biodiversity that are used as active ingredient or as oil, as waxes in cosmetic and other products. And we work at 3 different levels. If we want to summarize a bit the services of UEBT, so we work as a platform for companies. So we offer opportunities for companies in the sectors that I have mentioned to exchange on topic related to biodiversity and social aspect and learn from each other. So for instance, very shortly, we will have our annual conference, which is one of the moments where those exchanges take place. We also offer the possibility to run supply chain assessment, because as you may imagine, we work with those companies that have many different supply chain all around the world. So we offer these services for them to assess the practices and indeed which improvement is needed, if any. And indeed, to do those improvements, we also we also offer guidance and tools to support them. And one of the tools that you will see now is exactly the biodiversity action plan. All this work that we do build on our standard. So as also Anja mentioned, so the standard is inspired by the BioTrade principle and criteria, and we summarize this in 2 key pillars: the respect for people and the respect for biodiversity. So when it is about biodiversity, we look at biodiversity conservation. So all what is also around a farm or around a wild collection area, but it is also about sustainable use of the resources. So sustainable cultivation practices, sustainable wild collection practices. While on the people side, we have a requirement around human and workers' rights and community development. The focus of today's presentation is really on the biodiversity pillars, and the tool that we have here is the Biodiversity Action Plan, which is a sort of roadmap that companies can use when they want to implement action for biodiversity. And this roadmap builds on 5 components. So starting from assessing what the potential risks or opportunities are for biodiversity in a certain context and given certain farming or wild collection practices, and then define goals, target, measures, and the work plan that can respond to address the risk and enhance the opportunities identified. But also there is, last but not least, the monitoring. So also defining impact and performance indicators that can be monitored to see indeed if the targets are achieved and the action are successful, or if anything has to be adjusted. The Biodiversity Action Plan is exactly the tool and the approach that we have implemented in the context of South Africa. And I give now Gerhard the floor to indeed explain us a little bit about the context and the issue that we have identified while implementing the Biodiversity Action Plan. Then I will pop up again for a few words on the partnership, and then Gerhard will continue on the action. Thank you, Gerhard.
Okay. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity. When it specifically comes to Buchu and Rooibos, they are both plants that occur naturally, are endemic, in fact, to the Western Cape, to the fynbos Cape Floral Kingdom. So fynbos, the Cape CFK, is a Conservation International designated biodiversity hotspot that contains definitely at least 8,700 species. Some botanists speculate that it could be more than 9,500 species. And you can see there the largest percentage of those are endemic to the area and to the fynbos biome. So yeah, so we have a lot of concentrated species, particularly plant species, in this little area, which is the only plant kingdom that actually occurs in only one country. If you look at the world map of the plant kingdoms, you can't actually see the Cape Flora Kingdom. It's too small. You have to zoom in to see it. But it contains by far more plant species than any other. So obviously, it would be clear that plants in this highly diverse ecosystem would be of international value and importance, particularly if it's traded. So in the case of these two species, I would have to say, in the case of rooibos, it's one species. There's only one species involved. It's the Spalathus linearis. That is both wild harvested and cultivated, but has been developed into more a cultivated species than a wild harvested one, although wild harvesting still occurs. But there's very strong overlap in this case between the wild harvested environment industry and the cultivation industry, and it's the same people basically doing both. The same goes for buchu. Buchu, although as a genus, it contains a large number of species, but there are two main ones that are grown. The one is particularly more for consumption, as a tea derived products, and then the other one is more for cosmetics and stuff like that. So the one that is grown for cosmetic purposes grows a little bit more along the south coast, although there's a lot of overlap in the west coast region for both those products. So it's an important. Well, it's not only wildlife resources that we have. You can imagine that with such a huge variety of species available, that there's a lot of room for development of more genetic resources, particularly from a plant perspective. But those are the ones that are really internationally known. It's also, despite the fact that it's cultivated, it's important to know that in both cases, these species are not domesticated. They are essentially still the wild resource. Some ecotypes of which have been developed into more suitable for cultivation, but they definitely are not domesticated in any sense of the word. They are very much still a wild genetic resource that we are working with. So it seems clear that the challenges would revolve mostly around things like biodiversity protection, especially in relation to cultivation. I'll concentrate on that more in the next slide. But certainly, thanks, Simona. So this is a picture of a planted buchu, a recently planted buchu field. So one of the challenges with moving from wild harvesting to cultivation is clearly that you need to clear land, and because of the immense diversity in fynbos, particularly beta diversity, I don't want to bore you with the details, but it means that there's a lot of difference from one area to the next in the landscape. So land clearing particularly is very harmful to fynbos as an ecosystem and as a biome. And then, of course, with cultivation, you are removing diversity, something that we are trying to address with regenerative farming approaches, which I'll mention a bit later on as well. But there are other, the Western Cape, some climate change studies have been conducted, which tend to indicate that there might be a bit of warming and less rain, especially in the northern parts of the production area of rooibos and buchu. So certainly, I mean, we've been lucky in the past few years, and this year especially is actually a very good year for both species to grow. We've had excellent rain and excellent weather, but there are concerns that one would have to be, particularly because it's not a domesticated crop. So there's not a lot of effort going into developing cultivars. So it's possible at the moment that we have a little bit of inbreeding happening in especially the cultivated sector, and that could be causing. We don't have any scientific evidence for this at this stage, but there are indications that could be leading to plants living not as long as they did in the past, but more vulnerability to pests and disease and so on. Buchu as a cultivated crop is a fairly new concept. We are working now with trying to specify what a biodiversity action plan would look like for a farm that is a member of UEBT, who are cultivating buchu, but we are quite literally, I think, at the moment writing that book. It's a longer-lived species than rooibos. Rooibos lives for about 4 or 5 years. Buchu, well, we don't actually know how long it lives yet, because they are the oldest cultivation that we know of are now 22 years old, and they are still producing. So it's almost like a perennial crop. But the landscape around it, I think, Simona, if you could go to the next slide.
Yes. I think in this next slide, maybe I say a few words myself, and then I will let you continue on the next, because indeed what Gerhard,
sorry, just if we could limit the end of your presentation to like 3 or 4 more minutes, then we have some time for discussion. Yes.
That's perfect. Thanks. So indeed, because then all this complex situation that Gerhard has identified brought us to also get involved in this partnership, which include the GIZ and the BioInnovation Project and the UEBT, the South Africa Rooibos Council and the Buchu Association, and local consultant like Gerhard to work together on an action plan to address those issues. And indeed here, Gerhard, if you can continue then with the result, we have the action for the rooibos and the action for buchu, please.
Yeah, so we've been assisting 13 farms with biodiversity action plans. It's been a process of identifying what the main issues might be, and have a sort of a collective approach on what are the main things to address. So in our case here in the Western Cape area, it would be the conservation of rainforests clearly is very important around specifically cultivated areas and so on. Invasive alien plants specifically, there are some animals and so on, but the main issue is invasive plant species that presents a challenge that is addressed on many of the farms and many areas where production takes place. There's a strong focus on soil management at this stage of the game, because that's also the thing that would protect you against potential climate change. And the soil diversity is probably the low-hanging fruit in terms of adapting to whatever challenges the environment might bring you. Things like erosion is continuously addressed. Integrated pest management is also gaining force as a real solution to pest problems. There's a lot of pressure to get away from chemicals, even if you are not farming organically. Monitoring of climate change is a challenge for a particular farmer. It requires large databases and so on, but it is something that the Western Cape Department of Agriculture has their eye.
I think we lost Gerhard, so I try to continue myself and conclude this last point that Gerhard was saying about the monitoring, which is more a sector level action that has been implemented, and then concluding on buchu so that we leave time for questions. In this case, as Gerhard was saying, we are more in an exploratory phase. So far we have worked with one farmer. We are in discussion with the sector. And we have identified some key practices and action for biodiversity, very similar to what's done for rooibos. It's really a lot around conservation and restoration of fynbos ecosystem, especially to create these ecosystem services that are important for the buku to be resilient, and also the clearing of invasive species and all the practices around natural soil management and integrated pest management. So in short, those are the key action that we have been defining, and in the case of rooibos, also very much implementing with many farmers, and then that we are now in the phase of implementation with buku. So with this, I think it's time for us to conclude our intervention, and I'm happy to respond if there are any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Simona and Gerhard. I hope Gerhard is going to be able to join us again. But I think also we can maybe invite also Anja. So Simona, stay with us here for the question and answers. I would like to invite all the speakers back to the stage as long as they're here. There's already the first question that was asked by the audience. And it is, to what extent can biodiversity-based value chains and voluntary schemes like UEBT or Fair Wild serve as credible evidence for compliance with EU due diligence rules, such as the deforestation regulation or the CSDDD? And where are there gaps that they cannot cover? Who would like to take the question?
I guess I can at least start, because I'm very much involved in the development of the UEBT standard. I think the question is around like how much the application of those standards can address also the requirement from those regulations. So I can tell you that our standard does cover requirement around, as you have seen, conversion of ecosystems and actually action to avoid this. And ecosystem also include forests. So in this, so actually our standard, if you like, it's even broader, because we don't only look at deforestation, but we do look at the conversion of any sort of ecosystem. So I think that all the parts of our standard are defined in a way that indeed help company to also fulfill those regulations. And we try, so in terms of gaps, at this moment, I cannot give a full overview, but what I can tell you is that we constantly compare and review our standard to align with those regulations. There are also requirements around, I think in those reporting framework, it's also some topics that are very important is energy use, water use, soil, and all those aspects are also covered in the standard.
Anja, anything you would like to add?
I think Simona is expert here, but maybe to say that, yeah, it might not cover everything, but I think it is a very good tool also to do some kind of risk assessment, because the evaluation process looks into so many different things. And I know that those due diligence rule also ask for risk assessment. And I think this continuous assessment evaluation, also the action plan, really shows also kind of risk assessment and mitigation, which obviously is an important step. So it can probably be one tool to contribute to those, but it would not cover everything if you are UEBT certified. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that was very clear. Everyone in the audience, you're very welcome to keep asking your questions via the chat function. But in the meantime, maybe a question to Anja. What would you say are the main challenges for companies in implementing sustainability and due diligence frameworks in biodiversity-based markets, especially after what you've presented, that these markets are highly fragmented, often informal, and sort of regard many, many ingredients at the same time with these quick innovation cycles? So I guess there's many challenges, but what would you say are the main ones?
I would then hand it over also to Simona, who are working, basically they're working with the company, so they know that much better. But from the point of view of the project that I've been part of since 6 years, it is obviously this, as you mentioned, this kind of fragmentation. So this Centella Asiatica value chain that where I showed the picture in the very beginning, there's thousands and thousands of individual pickers, and the traceability obviously is very difficult. So even if you are a European-based company and you would like to comply, it is just a very difficult process to go through, because the first steps are very often informal. So you would really need to formalize something which is traditionally informal to ensure traceability, and to ensure compliance, which is obviously a big effort, as I could see it already from our projects. But Simona, please add here.
Yes, no, actually, I can just basically echo what you said. This is especially for wild collection. This is one key step and one key challenge. So to understand where exactly the ingredient come from and what the dynamic are. What I can say, maybe what I can add is also that not as a challenge, but maybe as a solution, is that for instance, at the UEBT, we are trying also to support our company, and we are building up risk database and things like that, so that at least, even if you don't have a full knowledge or a full traceable supply chain, at least you can identify risks that are specific to a certain supply chain, which is one of the key steps in the due diligence, and really then start focusing on those risks to start addressing. And this is already a good step toward the solution. But in terms of challenges, I would completely agree with Anja, with what she just said.
Great. And now there's more and more questions coming in. So let's try to also maybe brief answers so that we get them all in. And also, Gerhard, you're very welcome to join us back on stage so that you can also contribute from your perspective, really the practice aspects. Now there's a question on the CSRD. The ESRSE4 is dedicated to biodiversity impact assessment. Have you analyzed it against your schemes? And if you know what ESRSE4 is, please maybe explain briefly. Who is able to answer to that?
I guess, again, this is around our standard, and if we have done this sort of benchmark, and I can tell you that also with respect to this, we do keep an eye, and we have a set of impact indicators, and again, those impact indicators should address or respond to the requirement of those reporting framework, again, around the land conversion or around the emission, around carbon sequestration, soil, water, and all this. What I would like to add is also that those, but what is important to highlight maybe at this moment is that really our work and our impact indicator are really at the field level, so cultivation, wild collection, and I think those reporting scheme also look at other stage of the supply chain, such as the processing and those steps that in our that does not really fall into our direct work.
All right, and then next question, and I don't know if that's something that also Gerhard has some view on. How might we effectively encourage and engage indigenous peoples in establishing supply chains that support their livelihoods and the local biodiversity?
Yeah, it's a fairly new thing in South Africa, but South Africa is, in terms of legislation and compliance with the Nagoya Protocol, and so on, we are on our way. You may be aware that rooibos, there's an industry level agreement in terms of rooibos specifically with the local San and Khoisan councils. So a levy is paid at the processor level. And then that money is actually, it's not like all the indigenous people in South Africa are involved in rooibos, in the rooibos industry specifically, and also in Buchu, but the locals, the descendants of the indigenous people, are involved in both wild harvesting and cultivation, and participate. And there is, in fact, I'm involved at the moment in writing a biodiversity plan for what's an organization called the Cederberg Indigenous Peoples Association, which will be the platform from which funding from the TK levy, as we call it, which is really an ABS levy, funnels back into the rooibos industry to develop to both protect and develop the product, and specifically maybe address things like larger, just more commercial scale farming for the indigenous people. There are a lot of indigenous farmers, but they're very small. They're micro farmers, really, mostly organized into cooperatives and so on. But there's a lot of good cooperation with those products specifically, and that I can report on. South Africa clearly has a long way. The rooibos industry was almost used as an example because it's an established, commercialized industry, way past the speculation phase. But the idea with the ABS agreement for rooibos was particularly done in a way that hopefully will inform future development of biodiversity products, in which the local people play a role.
Great, thank you. I think that's it's very interesting also to see how many different efforts to sort of engage with communities then work together. Maybe a final one-line answer. There was one more question around, are there any existing and reliable public maps of indigenous populations to be able to check sensitivity of the sourcing areas?
Is this question for me? I'm assuming there are a lot of environmental informants in South Africa. Our country has a lot of problems, but that's not one of them. We have an enormous amount of environmental and biodiversity informants, and we know what occurs where and what the challenges are in terms of harvesting and so on. Obviously, it's on a case-by-case basis, but I think we are well positioned to address both biodiversity concerns and indigenous people's concerns with everything that we have in place for it.
Right. Then I think also if there's any resources that you would like to share, the SASI website usually makes resources available. So also in the aftermath and in the audience, do check back onto this edition of the lunch break for additional information that might be published in the next few days. Anja, I saw your hand. We are running out of time, but I saw you wanted to react. So maybe a short final statement, and then I will hand over towards the outro.
I want to come to the question before, and maybe on the your point of the GIZ rather, because Gerhard is talking about a sector which already exists, and they're looking into how to empower the indigenous people to also take over other steps in the value chain. The question is phrased a bit in a way that I, from a GIZ point of view, would say you should not empower indigenous people, but you should first look at the market. Is there an interest for the product that they can produce? And then support them in doing this. And this is what our project did. We really started with a market interest, and then we supported the communities and the indigenous people to produce it, because if not, they will be sitting with their resource, and that it can be a quite frustrating experience. So that is maybe a lessons learned I just wanted to share from our side.
Great. Thanks a lot, Anja. That was a very worthwhile addition. Great for raising that. So from my side, Anja, Simona, and Gerhard, thank you very much for joining. I would now like to hand over to the end of our lunch break for today to Charlotte Haeusler-Vargas from the SASI, who's going to give a little summary and an outlook to next edition in October. Charlotte, please.
Yeah, thank you, Annette. And I'd also like to say thank you, obviously, to all the speakers today. So thank you, Anja Teschner, thank you, Simona D'Amico, and also thank you, Gerhard Pretorius, for your valuable inputs. Together, we explored how biodiversity-based value chains can support sustainable production and innovation in agriculture, with examples such as medicinal and aromatic plants, forest products, and locally managed community cultivation projects. The session highlighted how companies, local communities, and other actors can work together to protect biological and cultural resources, implement due diligence, and create inclusive, resilient, and economically strong supply chains. So on behalf of the SASI team, I'd like to extend my thanks to all the speakers and participants for their insightful contributions today. For any further questions and information, please reach out to SASI anytime via our website or LinkedIn, and sign up for our monthly newsletter to be informed about events, studies, and our funding opportunities for more sustainability in your supply chains. Last but not least, I kindly invite you to join us at our next SASI lunch break, which will take place on Friday, October 10th. Please note that due to a national holiday in Germany on October 3rd, the lunch break will exceptionally be held on the second Friday of the month instead of the first. We'll be soon sharing the topic via our communication channels. Thank you. We look forward to seeing you all in October.